Beam, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And, it's such a fitting kind of opening to really think about how the realm of the spiritual can both enslave us, but also bring us great opening. And I think, certainly, as someone who is a survivor of the caste system, this is really the meat of my work and the things that I explore in my book, The Trauma of Caste. And for folks who don't know a lot about the caste system is a system of exclusion that's at the foundation of many dharmic lineages. And it's a system analogous to race, where, because of a social fiction, priests who developed these systems basically set up, a hierarchy of where every job had a different layer of spiritual purity. So priests were at the top, rulers were next, merchants followed, then there was peasants, and then there was a group of people who were seen to be so spiritually defiling to all of the other castes because of crimes they had done in a past life that they were seen as untouchable. And those are my people. And I remember always thinking about what it meant to be untouchable, because for someone to touch you was for them to experience spiritual defilement. But for us who were born into those castes, we were seen to be irredeemable and without a place towards God. And that is a tremendous thing to say about anybody, let alone to be the foundation of a system of exclusion. And I think that is really what really made me hone in on how traumatic the caste system was, because certainly we are the most underdeveloped communities in the world. And, over 1.9 billion people live under a caste system. And in the United States, over 5.7 million South Asians and endure and struggle with the exclusion related to caste. But I think that for me, the piece that was the most heartbreaking was this condemning of being someone without divinity. And I think the course of my own path of building, turning pain into power, and also figuring out ways that we might heal as a South Asian community and all communities that struggle under caste systems, was really looking at that piece of where we can understand ourselves to be survivors of religious abuse, but also find opening when we acknowledge that pain, to find the ways that we might return humanity to each other. And that is really one of the profound messages in my book, is that, when you look at systems of exclusion, particularly those like the caste system, we have a tremendous responsibility for us as communities are wanting to engage around practices of the ways that we might be, taking practices like socially engaged Buddhism and being people who are transforming our institutions through our faith, that we also have to acknowledge how institutions of faith have been weaponized to harm. And I think that I really had probably grappled with all of the social political understandings of caste throughout my career as an expert of caste and DEI and caste equity. I don't think I had reckoned with my own pain as being a survivor of religious abuse. And some of those things, when you're born as an untouchable, you don't feel like you belong to any religious community. And especially because of that sense of spiritual defilement and never feeling truly clean or part of any community. And that path towards healing, that path towards integration to humanity, that is the journey that most caste oppressed people have to take. And I think it really begins with first saying, yes, I am a survivor of religious abuse. And no one gets to determine our path towards God. And I think I've been really lucky in terms of the many different racial justice, gender justice, and workers' rights movements that have really begun to flank caste oppressed people like myself around the country as we speak our truth, both about our pain, but also the power that we want to build as we come out of the closet everywhere around the world. And the thing that I find most profound is the first step of our freedom is we actually lose the word untouchable. Nobody gets to use that word, it's seen as a slur, but we call ourselves Dalit, those that have been broken, but are now resilient as we move our path towards freedom. And the thing that I think that is so profound, especially about the work that we're doing in North America, is that even though caste oppressed people are some of the oldest oppressed peoples in the world, no one expected caste to be brought here into the United States because there's no reason for it, right? We don't, dominant caste people are not in power in the United States. This is not the historical lineage of how we understand systems of oppression here in the US. We may understand the US as a result of settler colonialism and the results in the enslavement of kidnapped Africans. But we do not understand what has happened here in the United States as a result of the caste system from South Asia. So why are we seeing caste operate here? And in our work, I am the executive director of Equality Labs. We are a national Dalit civil rights organization. Our research was some of the first research to find that South Asian immigrants had unfortunately brought caste to every institution that they are a part of. And in our research, 1 in 4 caste oppressed people experience physical and verbal assault, 1 in 3 educational discrimination, and 2 out of 3 workplace discrimination. And, usually when I say those numbers to people are like, oh, you mean in India? And I have to say, no, here in the United States. And when we look at that, again, I have to go back to this idea of trauma, because I think for many folks, we are used to thinking about systems of exclusion through their political realms, maybe even their economic and development realms, but we are not used to thinking about them through the lens of intergenerational harm and trauma. And that I actually think is one of the most important ways that we need to start engaging with systems of exclusions, because we can change the laws to make discrimination unlawful. But if we don't change the hearts and the minds and the conditioning of the nervous systems of both the oppressed and the privileged, we will mindlessly recreate these systems, whether we want to or not. And I think that there is a great deal of work that has been done by Indigenous and Black somatic and mindfulness practitioners to really lift up that integration of ideas for all of us, because we are in this really, massive crisis moment as global societies, where we are seeing systems of domination that we thought had been put away, or trends of, right-wing movements that we had thought we've done that. We've already dealt with Nazis. We don't have to deal with that anymore. And yet we're seeing the resurgence of these movements without any sort of understanding in a broad way as to what's happening. And I think this is really what really inspired me to write my book as well, is that coming into 2019, this was a profound moment, I think, for those of us who are in South Asian communities, because we saw the opening of a large genocidal project in our homelands. It's a result of years of, building rising ethnonationalism. And there was a sense of despair with almost everyone that I knew that, in some ways, the democracy that we knew in South Asia, that was the birth of all these modern, democratic republics, whether it was, Pakistan or India or Bangladesh, we had a sense that there was a moment of possibility for our communities to leave behind centuries of violence and discrimination. And yet here we were at the opening of 2019 into 2020, at this huge genocidal project that was launched in India against hundreds of millions of minorities. And people really just didn't know what to do. And it's a result of endless cycles of violence. And I think that in looking at that, as someone who's worked on this for many years, who was actually talking to many of my elders and mentors who were just heartbroken because they had seen all of their wins of their lives being, unmade before them, I felt that we needed another path, another way. And as I started to engage with other thinkers who were also looking at the way that trauma, looking at the way that we could start to look at the training of our nervous systems around these systems of exclusion, you start to see that there is a growing body of work that's helping us try to make sense of this very difficult moment. And I really want to lift up the thinkers like Eduardo Duran and Maria Braveheart, who, first really kind of pushed open this door of thinking about large systems of exclusion through the lens of intergenerational trauma. And Eduardo Duran spoke a lot about this idea of the soul wound, a wound that exists in someone that's not just about their existing pain, but it's the pain of their lineage that comes from these systems of violence. So for Indigenous people, it might be that of settler colonialism and genocide. And Resma Menachem took this idea and then talked about it in terms of the racial soul wound, and talked about how those of us who, have experienced the pain of enslavement, could feel, or the pain of racialization would feel it as the racial soul wound. And I think these ideas of looking at that pain across generations opens up a different understanding for how we see this endless cycle of violence across these very painful systems of domination. Because then we're not just looking at what is happening to the bodies and the nervous systems of the oppressed. We are also looking at the ways that the bodies and the nervous systems of the privileged are also trained in a particular way under these nervous systems. And as I examined that in the context of caste, it made a lot of sense. Because certainly for, Dalit people like myself, the burden of dealing with the caste system is solely on ourselves. We are responsible for both breaking the silence about it, as well as documenting the crimes and the context of how it just ravages our bodies and minds and spirits every day. But we also face extreme gaslighting and tremendous amounts of violence when we do come out about this issue. Even for myself, I have had to I've had thousands of rape and death threats for talking about the issue of caste. I've lived in safe houses for breaking this issue out into the American public. And all because we're telling the simple truth that caste exists, there is severe discrimination, and we need a remedy in American policy. But to move through that cycle and understand what the grief is and the pain is as Dalit people around it, it's a tremendous thing to also then put the lens on the privileged. And I've really learned so deeply from the work of, Black Buddhist thinkers like Lama Rod Owen, will be speaking after me, but also Rhonda McGee and Ruth King, who have taken the practice of mindfulness to then start to put a spotlight on the conditioning of the nervous systems of the privileged. And that's to do that is not to decenter the experiences of the oppressed, but it's actually to also to remind those who are in privileged bodies that you are part of this process too. It's not like race happens to another body and you're outside of it, or caste happens to another body and you're outside of it. Oftentimes, bodies of the privileged really have no tolerance for the conversation that they have exempted themselves from, despite the fact that they're gaining incredible amounts of privilege. And so to slow down enough to be able to have people become self-aware and think deeply about their lineage and their training around these soul wounds, this is, I think, one of the most fundamental works that we need to do as socially engaged Buddhists, as people who are trying to make moral choices in difficult times. We need to bring our whole selves to the process of social change, especially when we want to be in institutions that we lead, with our hearts and our moral compasses in the right direction. And I found that when we are able to give grace for those who are both suffering from that of oppression, but also those who have been benefiting from it, there is an opening where we can start to begin bridges of conversation. I'm not saying that we're always going to agree, because we certainly don't always agree. But right now, we are in such a place of polarization, where, caste oppressed people and caste privileged people are in such far divides of this conversation, we're not even able to have a shared reality. And this is true across many systems of oppression right now. We are seeing such a divide that we no longer have consensus. And so I think some of these tools that are coming out of Black and Dalit and Indigenous somatic practitioners and socially engaged Buddhist practitioners, there are tools here, I think, that are really about us slowing down, knowing that there's disagreement. And I view disagreement in this context as deep suffering because of how much trauma has separated us from each other. That in many ways, if we are able to begin to build more resilience in the bodies of the privileged for smaller, even a small amount of caste stress or racial stress or gender stress, that ability for us to build more resilience in those bodies help us then begin to slowly have more conversations about consensus. And do I think that's hard? Yes, absolutely. As someone who has been working on caste equity, I have seen how difficult it is to cross divides of discrimination and bias, um, especially with caste, which is one of the oldest systems of discrimination in the world. And it's not only one of the oldest, it's really also one of the systems that there just is not a lot of spotlight on. And as there's become a growing amount of global conversation on it, dominant caste people who've been benefiting from this system are not happy at all. And the kinds of techniques and the strategies that they use to shut down Dalit people is horrific. For example, last year, I was actually supposed to give a talk about Google about caste equity, and people wrote in and complained, and they said, if this speaker speaks, I am afraid for my life. And, I always joke with my colleague Tanuja, who had to deal with this, who was inside Google. I said, well, I know that people feel uncomfortable with DEI, but I've never met anybody who has died from a DEI talk. But I certainly know that there are people who feel discomfort. And so while we organized inside of Google around this issue related to caste equity, we saw tremendous worker power being built, but also utter resistance from management on this issue. And this is, I think one of the most profound pieces that I think we also have to grapple with is that when we are turning to things like socially engaged Buddhism to find openings in times of deep suffering, there are times where we also have to begin to loosen our attachments to the structures that perpetuate violence and discrimination. And so I think for me, my first truth has been I must first speak my experience as being a survivor of religious abuse. My next piece has been I need to transform my conditions to be able to make sure that no one experiences what I have experienced as someone who is caste oppressed. And for me, here in the United States, my focus is in transforming American institutions so that caste oppressed workers don't face discrimination in their workplaces and educational institutions. And that experience at Google launched an entire workers movement across the tech sector, where you have thousands of tech workers who are speaking about the need for remedy by adding caste as a protected category. And they are now joined by workers all around the country who are asking remedy from governments, from corporations, and from universities, wherever they might be. And we are very lucky to be at Harvard, which was one of the second Ivy League schools to add caste as a protected category. And I'm speaking now from California, where we are leading a campaign to have California be the first state in the country to add caste as a protected category. And this is a tremendous thing to see, some of the most oppressed peoples in the world come out of the closet and speak about what is happening here in the United States. And it's been an honor to be part of this process because, again, I am a civil rights activist. I do a lot of writing, and I am my own personal Buddhist, practitioner. But I never expected, hundreds of thousands of people around the world to take this spirit of freedom that came from confronting their own internal conditions of suffering and then use it to transform the institutions in the material world. But that's exactly what's happening right now with the caste equity movement. And if you ever, catch any one of those hearings or you see any of those news articles, the stories of how people are turning pain into power is tremendous, because we see, on in terms of our side, we have people who are Uber drivers and people who cleaned up COVID wards, people who are caregivers, people who are doctors and nurses and lawyers, and of course techies, all of whom who have stories of severe discrimination. And yet, on the other side, we have people who are uncomfortable with the prospect of sharing space with caste oppressed people who simply want to be free from discrimination. But discomfort is not the same as grave discrimination. And I think this small experience of what caste oppressed people are doing in the state of California, I think is an example for all of us in terms of how we can see socially engaged Buddhism transform the many institutions that we might go into. Is that for us to say that we are willing to be unattached to the things that cause us suffering means we must be completely committed to the freedom of all beings. And in order to do that, we must learn, we must be willing to confront structures that are allowing grave discrimination, and to also look at all of the dimensions that systems of oppression operate in, whether it's internal, interpersonal, or structural. And so for me, I think that in speaking about the trauma of caste, it isn't just about the pain and the wound that connects the oppressed and the privileged. It's also about how that wound becomes a portal for greater understanding and a greater opening and reconnection to humanity. Because I don't think Buddhism was ever about simply going to the top of a mountain and thinking about the ways that you might detach from humanity and live in this rarefied air. I think it was about how we find the enlightenment with each other, the ways that we lift ourselves up as a species and transform not only the institutions that we're part of, but our relationships across the entire spectrums of the earth, whether it's with ourselves, other species, and the planet. This need for reconnection, this is the heart of the practice. And I think that if we can center in healing, our vehicles of rage and our vehicles of love will ultimately transform us and the planet. Thank you, JP.